And hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Building the Case for the Top Data Job. This year's the third this year in the series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Now let me give the floor to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speaker and today's webinar. Megan.
Thanks, Shannon. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs, and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are so excited that you all found the time to join us for today's webinar on building the case for the top data job. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon Kemp and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I introduce your speaker and also let you know about some housekeeping items. We are planning 1 hour for the presentation, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. We'll try to answer as many questions as time allows at the end, but feel free to submit them as they come up throughout the session. To answer the top 2 of your most commonly asked questions, yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and any other information you request during the session within the next 2 business days. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. We have set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed and we'll include answer to these questions in our Q&A towards the end as well. We also want to let you know about a special webinar coming up next week. Join Peter Aiken and Micheline Casey for an interactive discussion on the role of the Chief Data Officer. Attendees will be presented with big ideas and alternative ways, not only on how to think about the role, but also how to plan and establish a CDO position at their organization. Now let me introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized thought leader in the data management field. Many of you already know him and have seen him at conferences nationally and worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written 7 books and dozens of articles. Peter's experience is more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as one of the top 10 data management experts in the world. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with organizations as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He is highly desired at conferences and workshops and always traveling to numerous speaking engagements and projects. Peter, where are you today?
So actually right down the hall from you, Megan. We can't fool anybody.
It's true. You are right down the hall.
Exactly. So thanks, everybody. And it's kind of fun to do a little preview of some ideas that have been percolating a while in this community. And I want to make sure that I give a proper shout-out to some of my colleagues who have put some ideas into this. We're really looking at sort of a profound shift in terms of the way we need to think about data in these environments. So our talk today is building the case for the top data job, and as always, it's brought to you by Data Blueprint and Virginia Commonwealth University, which is a part owner of it. And here is our wordly to describe what we're going to be doing, which sometimes helps people who are visually oriented, and other times this confuses people. So we'll move to the next one and talk about the agenda. As always, we start out with giving you a little bit of data management grounding and context. Then we're going to move into an explanation of why there typically isn't, but ultimately must be, an authority, a chief of organizational information assets. Then we'll look at why CIOs have not been so far able to devote the required time and attention to this topic. We'll talk about the seriousness of the skill gap that's here, because requisite experience in this area is very difficult to find. And then finally, understanding the ideal relationship between data and IT. And I'll give you the quick 2-second summary in case some of you have to leave early. It's pretty straightforward. The data portion of what we're doing in systems development is not something that can be considered a project. It must be managed outside of the systems development lifecycle context in order to be successful. It should not report to IT, and the top data job must be a full-time position. So those are the bottom lines. Let me now work my way around to the arguments for them. And I'm looking forward to the discussion because this is a very ill-defined field, and these are some thoughts that we have. We're certainly not going out there and saying this is right. What we can say is what has been working or what has been attempted so far has not been working. And so we need to try something else. After all, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And in some ways, it seems like that's what we've been trying in this field for too long, so let's try some of the different things. As always, we start off by giving you the idea that data management consists of 5 integrated data management practices. This is the chart that we show to management. It's very confusing, so we'll do the quick overview of it. The quick overview is very straightforward. The 5 integrated data management practices areas are: 1, data program coordination. This is the idea that we are managing the data coherently, and more importantly, we're managing the resources that manage the data coherently as well. Number 2 is organizational data integration. This is managing data sharing in your organization, whether it is piece to piece from one program to another program, whether it is one part of your organization, the marketing department, sharing data with the manufacturing organization, or whether it's between your organization and your business partners. If you don't control the sharing of data that's going on across boundaries, you have security problems, you have quality problems, and you also are being less efficient and effective than you could be. And you'll be amazed at some of the stories that we can tell, having seen some of the existing practices that have built up over the years. The third function is data stewardship. Unless we make it personally responsible, unless it says, Peter, your next raise depends on you taking this pile of data and making it measurably more improved. Measurably more improved. There we go. That's a good one. If you can't demonstrate that you have measurably improved the quality of that data, your next raise is going to be at peril in there. So this is the idea of putting it in somebody's specific name and making it personal. Because if it's everybody's responsibility, nothing happens. Fourth area is data development, and this is the process of engineering data delivery systems. In the past, this has always meant building a new relational database management system because as we've taught people out of college and university for the past X number of years. It turns out that's wrong, but let's get to that in a little bit. And fifth area is data support operations. This is the idea that we're maintaining data availability. This is tuning our databases, this is making sure our disaster recovery plans work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we mean by the 5 data management practice areas. And these are important areas, and I always like to draw everybody's attention to Maslow at this point because many of you remember from your introduction to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we have things that are not safe at the bottom of that pyramid, if we are not fed, not safe, not sheltered, then it's going to be very, very difficult to get to that top part of the pyramid, which some of you remember is self-actualization. And it turns out there's an analogy in data as well. If we look at these data management practices at the bottom of the pyramid as providing a foundation, and the things in green as the sexy cool stuff that everybody wants to do with data, then we can quite easily prove to you that if you're doing things in the green area, and I don't care what it is, cloud, MDM, data mining, analytics, warehousing, big data, whatever you want to think of it on, anything in that green area that is not adequately supported by the rest of the foundational data management practices is going to take longer, cost more, and deliver less than it would if you built that data management practice area up in the first place. Now, a lot of this information comes from the DAMA, BAC, that stands for the Data Management Body of Knowledge, and we want to also alert you to the CDMP. There is now a certification in place, and we're hoping that some of you who are listening will in fact come to us at some point, possibly at the upcoming Enterprise Data World 2013 conference in San Diego, which will be at the end of April, beginning of May, and tell us that these sessions have been helpful for you, because that's what they are designed to do, is to help you increase your knowledge around here. And they do count as ongoing certification. So again, our wheel, if you will, the green thing, and I know that's a little hard to read on the right, if you just go to www.dama.org, you'll see the wheel in its glory, and you can look at a full-size picture of it there. Also finding out more about the Certified Data Management Professional designation, which, as you can see here, is a series of exams that we want you to take, pass, and now we will start to see that some people are starting to put on their job descriptions that they prefer a CDMP. So we are starting to make some progress in the marketplace there. Let's get into today's presentation now. And the first section here is talking about why there isn't, but ultimately must be, an authority, a chief organizational information asset manager. first question is, what does it mean to treat data as an organizational asset? And hats off to Tom Redman on this one. He did a lot of good work on this. His book, Data Driven, was the first one that really talked about treating data as an asset. So what is data as an asset? Well, assets are economic resources. They're things that relate directly to the economy. If I look at the old economy, I have horses, and so if I have a horse, I can have the horse and you can't. Or if you have the horse, then you have the horse and I can't. So these are economic resources. It means somebody owns or controls it. Now in our digital economy, we have a little difference in there, and I'll direct your attention to a paper by John Perry Barlow called The New Economy, the New Data Economy. He's done some really interesting work there defining what that is. But regardless, assets are resources, and in order to treat data as an organizational resource, we must own it and control it. You must use it to produce value, and the value can be converted into cash. Now, we're doing these two sessions together, this one and the one next week that Megan described to you, again, in hopes of soliciting from you all some of the ideas that are going into this. But I do have a book coming out on it called The Case for the Top Data Job, and that'll be out just in time for EDW, so we'll look forward to discussing some of that with you there as well. But the second book I've got coming out this year is called Monetizing Data Management, and this is specifically looked at the third point of how do we transform these data management practices into something that management understands, which is finance cash. So then what is an asset? Well, an asset is this resource that's controlled by the organization as a result of some past events. We did something to cause the asset to be created, transaction, something along the lines, and from which we expect future economic benefits to come to the organization. So data, clearly we're maintaining the lists of customers that we have in hopes of advertising to them. That's a very oversimplistic approach, but again, it's certainly something that most people can follow within that. So with assets, what this means is you can formalize the care and feeding of the data. We might, for example, talk about cash management, and those of you that are familiar with the story of Enron, which is a very interesting story, turned out they didn't have any cash management controls. Here's a Fortune 500 company where anybody in the organization could write a check for any amount of money for any reason. And, you know, CFOs kind of grab their chests and go, whoa, wait a minute, I'm glad I wasn't the CFO when that was put in place, because that would be considered irresponsible. But it is about putting data to work in very unique and very significant ways. This means that the organization will identify not the data that it has, we need that, but also the data that it will need in order to achieve its strategy. So that's what it's all about, applying data in support of strategy. Now, some of you may know that for years and years we've been doing these surveys, and we have results from more than 500 different organizations, where we can now look specifically, and this is just sort of a sample of what the surveys have been done. We've got a lot of government agencies, some federal government components, a lot of public companies, but I can already tell you that the data management practices in Europe are more advanced than they are in the United States, and that may be something that people want to pay attention to, find out reasons for, investigate, all that sort of thing. Or some people just say, the heck with it, I'm moving to Europe. I'm not advocating one position or another, but it is important. It's also important for me to explicitly state at this point that this is not an attack on chief information officers. So I want to make sure that I explicitly state the position here that CIOs have done some absolutely phenomenal things, really, really amazing things that they've put. They've developed phenomenal skill sets. But where does one go for CIO training? It's kind of an interesting piece. And it turns out that most of the training is sort of the school of hard knocks. That said, most CIOs have delivered excellent business value to the organizations that they work for. And the CIO is typically a chief information officer, and they think of that and say, oh, okay, well that means all that technology stuff falls underneath you. In fact, if we look at what a CXO function is, we can start to see that there's a lot of these types of officials, chiefs, if you will, at the top of organizations. For example, we have a CEO that would be the very top of the organization. We might have a chief security officer. We might have a chief performance officer or a chief privacy officer, depending on, again, how your organization uses the term, a chief operating officer, a chief quality officer, a chief risk officer. I mean, these things go on, and here are 58 of them that Wikipedia has collected so far. Actually, I got more than Wikipedia does, so it's mainly Wikipedia entries that are in there. So what does the word chief imply to you? Well, the chief officer title is the head of an organized body. It's the person in highest authority. The chief of police gets to make decisions that the lieutenants and the detectives and the foot patrolmen don't get to make. And they do that because the chief is implied to be the person in highest authority, the person with the most knowledge in that area. So similarly, we would expect the chief risk officer to be the person at the table who knows the most about organizational risk and can advise the organization from a risk perspective. The chief medical officer in most hospitals is the ultimate medical authority that is in there. And again, the public has expectations for these chief officers as well. We have a chief financial officer, the individual possessing the knowledge, skills, and abilities to make both financial decisions and also accounting type decisions in this environment. So when we think of chief, we think of they've got some requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities. And let's look at the chief financial officer just for starts. Typically, a chief financial officer has some prerequisites. By the way, I'll give you a very objective measurement. Virginia Commonwealth University is quite proud of the fact that the graduates of our finance program, our finance and accounting program, have the highest first-time pass rate on the CPA exam. So if you want to learn how to pass the CPA exam, by all means, go to VCU for your degree. However, CPA is not the only designation that we have for CFOs. Sometimes people will like a certified management accountant, which is a good designation as well, a master's of accountancy perhaps, other recognized degrees or certifications. All of these are necessary but insufficient prerequisites to being told that you as the person, the chief person in this organization, with the ultimate authority, you now have necessary qualifications, prerequisites, but they're still insufficient. We'd still like several years of experience and some other things that go into that particular mix. And now I'm going to turn the tables a little bit and talk about CIOs. And it turns out there are no specific qualifications for CIOs. One of the things that Misleading and I will talk about next week, and I'll just give you a little bit of a sense of where Misleading is coming from. She has a degree in marketing, but she is the first chief data officer appointed by any state in the United States. So she was the chief data officer for the state of Colorado, and she has done some amazing things in her tenure there, as well as since leaving the state as well. Anyway, back to our qualifications. There aren't any specific qualifications, although typically we kind of get excited about the fact that maybe they have a computer science or a software engineering or an information systems degree. Many of them also have a BS or an MS in order to do that. And it doesn't hurt if you have recognized leadership capabilities. Again, somebody who can mix with people at the top levels. And now let me just talk about that for a brief second because it's critically important. Many times what we see in the data community is that the data people have, in fact, a valid need that they want people to pay attention to. But if they come in and talk to the chief group, the rest of the chiefs that are sitting around a table of some sort, and they talk to them about normalization, that's not going to turn these guys on. They're really going to be unimpressed with the scientific talk that they have. So you need to be able to translate that into, okay, you shouldn't do this because the table will lack referential integrity. What you should do is do this because you will have a lot of customers returning products and goods and services, and we don't want to have our returns increase. That's a tangible business outcome that the business owners, the business leaders can relate to. So it's very important that we speak in their language as opposed to them speaking in our language. And when we look at where CIOs come from, you can see that a lot of organizations prefer operations, some of them finance, sales, marketing. Turns out IT actually has one of the lowest percentages of CIO qualifications when they come to bear. Now, again, this is neither good nor bad. We have no empirical evidence showing that operations-focused people are better at what they do than IT people. This is something that we need the research community to take a look at and get into. But at this point in time, we're trying different things and achieving different results, and conferences and talking to people are all part of the picture in terms of how this works out. Now, one thing I can tell you, though, is that we have a big problem in data management, and I've been studying this area for a long time, as Megan showed you. And here is a chart that shows what the 07 levels of data management maturity were. In other words, in 07, we took all the companies that we had and pulled them together and took the averages of them. And let me just explain the scale to you here, which is a standard capability maturity model. You get 1 point for showing up. You get 2 points if your practice is repeatable. So again, we see the 5 practice areas across the bottom: data program coordination, organizational data integration, data stewardship, data development, data support operations. And we graded those on a scale. And the average organization does not have documented data management practices in any of those 5 areas. And you can see that I've also added the 012 results, right? The 2012 maturity levels are not significantly different. While they look slightly higher, it's not statistically different. They are, in fact, in a dead heat. So we are not making progress in data management, and that is a problem as well. Why is it a problem? Well, by using the title CIO, most chief information officers, and I'm putting the number at 90%, 90% of the CIOs that are out there are absolutely unintentionally misleading their organizations. 2 ways. One, they're misleading them into thinking that their CIO is somebody with the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities to manage the organizational data assets. Now, if they haven't had training in that area, then it's very unlikely that they're going to know and understand the theory behind data-centric development practices, and that's a problem. The second piece is that they believe that somebody is actually in charge of using organizational data as an asset to support strategy. And this is probably the biggest flaw that I see in organizations as they're working this. Yes, the CIOs got this taken care of. After all, they're called the Chief Information Officer. But as you'll see in a little bit, we have some problems with that. Let me first, before we dive into that type of a description, talk to you about what it means to be a CDO. So the CDO, this is something that Misleading and I actually put together on here. It directs the organizational data leveraging, right, as coordinated architecture activities that ensures maximum support for strategy achievement. Let me give you a very brief, quick example of this. One of the top 10 banks that we worked with a couple of years back in the middle of the recession said that they had a strategy. They went to Wall Street and said, we're going to take our existing customer base. Now, our existing customers have 2 of our 9 products that we sell. So this bank sold 9 products, and the average customer had 2 of them. And they said, we're going to make a good fiscal mark this year by, instead of 2, we want all of our customers to have 4 of our products. On the theory, of course, that it's easier to sell to your existing customers than it is to go out and get new customers. So the data that would be leveraged in this case would be contacting existing customers, finding out about their needs, and then matching their needs with appropriate goods and services. Very, very reasonable and supportive strategy. The interesting part about this, however, was that by the time the strategy got down to the data level, it turned out they didn't have good contact information on many of their clients, and so they were not going to be able to sell to people that they couldn't communicate with. Again, a very flaw and a very fundamental piece of the strategy that's there. So this is what we mean by directing organizational data leveraging as a part of architecting activities that ensures maximal support for strategy. We also want the Chief Data Officer to understand and influence the business strategy through the leverage of these data assets. So some part of the organization may have a particular question about what they're doing or a strategy, and we want to show them how data can help them with that particular strategy. What are the duties of the Chief Data Officer? Well, understanding the business strategy and developing an aligned enterprise data strategy. After all, you don't want your business strategy to be X and your data strategy to be Y. Funny story, we got a call here at Data Blueprint just last month from a very, very big organization, and if I told you which one it was, you would all recognize this organization. And they said to us, we'd like you to develop a data strategy for us. And we said, well, great. what's your business strategy that you're supporting with this data strategy? And they said, well, it really doesn't matter. And we said, oh, yes, it does. Thanked them for the call and invited them to call back when they had a business strategy that they could tell us about. Again, some of these projects are just doomed from the start. So we want to make sure that that does not happen to any of you all. Another duty is leveraging, optimizing, and managing the enterprise data assets. As an asset, it has to be cared for just as your HR officers are caring for your workforce, just as your financial officers are caring for your physical assets. We want to coordinate enterprise data functions across the various lines of business, breaking down the various silos that exist where we have duplicative data. In fact, the average organization keeps their customer information in 17 locations. So there's a good measure. If you have fewer than 17, consider yourself fortunate. If you have more than 17, you're clearly below average. That said, is 17 the number? And of course it isn't. We certainly have few. I don't think it's one, by the way. I'm not advocating that we only put data in one place. That doesn't make any more sense. But what we do want to do is eliminate the uncontrolled duplication of data that creates the various silos that we're putting in place. Again, another duty is establishing a data governance program so people understand this. Let me just tell you a brief story about our work with the Army, which was terrific because it was really easy. In the Army, everything is governed. And when they found that they had a part of their operation, the data part, that was ungoverned, they immediately said, let's get that governed, right? So, that was probably one of the easiest data governance programs we were able to set up and get rolling. Another duty is to increase what we call data rot. And data rot stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And that turns out to be about 80% of your data out there. That's a lot. So if we have too much data, it's like having a messy desk. Where did I leave that one scrap of paper that had a phone number on it? And my desk is full of things, and I simply can't find the one piece of information. Well, your knowledge workers are spending a lot of time and attention doing exactly that, trying to find the right data. Which one of the 17 actually has the right customer data in it? We've finally want to also put in place the security architecture layer so we can make sure it's accessible by people who want to get to it and not accessible by people who don't want to get to it. Skills: critical thinking, communication, interpersonal relation, negotiations, administration, organization, analytic, problem solving. All of these are good skills to have, and this is one we'll talk about next week, and we are interested in your thoughts as well. Should a computer science information technology degree be something that's useful? Again, there are many people who are advocating not any knowledge there, but I wouldn't want people to come in not having any knowledge. So in absence of a specific one, again, I'll pick on an English degree. I'd rather have a computer science than an English degree in some cases. On the other hand, maybe I need to look at what the English degree people actually bring to us. So I said we're interested in your thoughts. Here's our first polling question, and those of you that are new to this, we're interested in your opinion. We use this information in some of our subsequent surveys and things. So here's our first polling question. What are CIOs in your perspective? Are they the ultimate authority on organizational information assets? Are they not fitted with the right expertise, or are they the connection between the data assets and the executive levels? We'll take a brief pause here and let everybody work on this and try to come up with it.
All right, we're getting some answers in. Let's see here. Give it some time. All right. It looks like 38% answered B, no. 14% answered A, yes, and 9% answered C, I don't know.
That's interesting. They don't quite match what I've got on my screen, Megan, but maybe that's an adjustment we have to make in there. All right, well, thanks for doing that, everybody, and let's move on to the next one. So, typically a chief person managing information. Second part here. Why CIOs haven't been able to devote the time and resources to do this. First question is, what do we teach business people about data? And the answer is practically nothing. I've been in all kinds of accreditation bodies. I know what the business school curriculums look like. I know exactly what's going on in these things, and data is sort of an afterthought. There's virtually no courses in how to do anything with data, outside of a couple of well-known examples at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. John Talbert's got a great program, and I'll be coming to visit those folks in April. And of course, Rich Wang's group up at MIT have put some things in the curriculum, and there are lots of other spotty places around the country where devoted professionals have gotten into this and done it in a good manner. But virtually the standard curriculum taken by 90% of the business people out there has nothing about data in it for them. And yet, what percentage of them deal with it daily? The answer is 100%. So when we look at that, we can see there's a huge gap. Now, CIOs and C-level people in general are smart people. So they've learned what we've asked them to teach. And let's look at what we've taught the IT people about this, because that, of course, is very interesting as well. Typically, if you're in an undergraduate or a master's level program in information technology, computer science, computer engineering, you get one course about data, and that course teaches you how to build a new database. Well, you know what? If there's a skill that we don't need in this world any more of, it is a course on how to build new databases. I'll tell you why. Again, 80% of IT investment is used to improve IT assets that already exist. That's what we call maintenance. And when we talk about maintenance, and we take smart people who want to learn about IT and we teach them only how to build new things, how good can they be at maintaining what they have? And the answer is not very good. So we take smart IT people, we give them this curriculum, and they look at this curriculum, and what impression do they get from it? They get that data is a technical skill that is used to develop new databases. This is not the best way to go and educate people about every organization's sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset. Now, each of those words is key. Strategic asset means it's one of the several at the highest level that you're going to be leveraging. Durable means it persists for more than 1 year. Of course, data does. Non-degrading means if you use it, it doesn't actually get used up. And non-depletable means that when you use it, it doesn't become less. So this is a very interesting set of characteristics for a strategic asset to have. Now, remember, this section is about why CIOs really aren't Chief Information Officers. Here's a CIO Insight. I'm just showing this as one of many, many surveys that I went through and took a look at. So this represents the coverage from 2005 to 2011 and how many of these pieces that I was able to get a hold of and include. So you can see Grant Thornton, which is a wonderful accounting partner that we have, does a State of the CIO survey. There is a CIO magazine survey. We've got that for a bunch of years. Accenture's done some things. IBM has done some things. NASCIO is the National Association of State CIOs, have them for the entire period. And what I did was looking at these two different parts. Oh, and of course, Gartner's in this as well. Gartner does a great job on this. When I look at these pieces here, there's two pieces of information. One is, what are the advisory services saying that CIOs should pay attention to from a prioritization perspective? In other words, Gartner says these are the priorities for the year 2005, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Right? And at the same time, we've also surveyed CIOs to ask them what they're concerned with. As you might imagine, there's a high degree of match between there. But when I take this data and normalize it, what you get are sort of the top 5 CIO concerns on a rolling basis from 2005 to 2011. And what I'm going to draw your attention to here is, of course, there's IT security and privacy on the left-hand side, and you can see it goes all the way to strategic planning on the right-hand side. But what you'll notice here is that outside of the actual topics of BI and analytics, which is about 1/3 of the way down, and information sharing, there's very, very little in there about data management. Now, the reason CIOs aren't concerned with data management is because they think it's being taken care of, because they have somebody down in the bowels of the organization, and we have other surveys that show that the number of levels between between data managers, if you will, and the top level of the organization is increasing instead of decreasing. So data is getting pushed further and further into the organization. And with that happening, again, we can't believe that CIOs think that it's terrible. If they thought it was terrible, they would do something about it. So they assume that it is being taken care of. Well, what does this mean from an overall perspective? First of all, when we look at the top job, whatever it is in organizations, again, a CEO, president of the company, whatever, we're going to have some other top jobs that are going to come up there. Again, the president of the company is going to want the finance person, perhaps the operations person, perhaps the sales and marketing, HR people to be the top advisors in the organization. Many are adding a top risk job to this as well. But then there's the folks that are in the basement here who are working with the data. So we then have somebody that's in charge of technology, and then hopefully you're seeing the response on this. Most CIOs are woefully mislabeled. When you take a person and ask them to do this many things that I've just listed there for you, controlling expense, leading change initiatives, negotiating with vendors, managing IT crisis, managing security, developing market strategies and technologies, where does the data go? If I add that to that list, I'll be lucky if I get 5% of these very important people's time in order to look at this. It does not make sense. And if they are doing it now, they're still doing it on a fraction of their time. So what we're advocating is that the chief data officer should be one of those people at the top of the organization. And I'll tell this next week as well when Micheline and I are both on this together, but I'm taking a kind of an extreme position. I want a chief data officer to report in at the top level of the organization. We'll talk about whether that's a permanent thing or not, but I think it's a necessary thing right now until the organization compensates for the fact that data has been managed incorrectly for years and years and years. So let's ask you all the second polling question that we have here now. The question is, what are CIOs? So again, we'll give you just a minute or so to think on that and come up with it.
All right, so the poll has been started, and we'll see what happens in a minute here.
And remember, we're not collecting your names with this or anything like that.
All right, and we're seeing here. Trying to show you guys the polling results here. All right, so it looks like 16% of you chose A,
yeah.
and then 31% chose B, and then 31% was C.
And 22% said they want some more choices. So we'll work on that one as well. Thank you for your input on that. Actually, one of the things we'll be looking at next week, and I forget, Megan, did we include the link to the survey in this presentation? We actually are doing some more drill down questions on this. And if you haven't had a chance to take our survey on this, we'll certainly get some more information out there. I think that may be at the end of the session, but we actually have just a little 10-minute survey that we're trying to get some more of this type of information together on. All right. Well, again, thank you for your participation there. So let's look at the skills gap in here and see what actually is working out on this. So the question is, what should the top data job do? And again, replace that with CDO if that's easier. People have been fussing at me and saying, don't introduce more terms into this because we've got a CDO, so why are you calling it a top data job? And again, that's sort of my extremism. I'll come back to that in just a little bit. But what we want CDOs to do is to leverage successfully the organizational data assets in support of strategy. It's a very simple thing, and it's a sole purpose job. If you do that, then we can do some other things as well much better than we've been able to in the past. So here's a couple of bits. Data leveraging permits organization to manage that sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset. That's what data is. If you had an asset that couldn't be depleted, didn't degrade, was durable, and of strategic importance, wouldn't you want to have somebody in charge of that? And this is not just within the organization, although even within the organization, when we look, 20 to 40% of IT costs are spent doing this kind of work, moving data around from one part of the organization to another in an unproductive fashion. So I virtually guarantee you that I could walk into any of your organizations and look at 20 to 40% savings in your IT budget. And for some of you that are listening, that amounts to millions and millions of dollars in there. In addition to within the organization, though, and it's helpful to get that, we also want to do that with our organizational data exchange partners. So anybody we're exchanging information with, we want that to be conducted in an efficient and effective manner, and perhaps more importantly, in a very safe manner as well, practicing our safe computing, as it will. So leverage is obtained through this implementation of data-centric technologies, processes, and human skills. And let me just show you on the diagram there. You can see there's the technology. It's the fulcrum and the lever. We need to be able to understand how to apply that. If you just had those two pieces lying on the ground and you didn't know how to use a lever, it wouldn't be possible to do that. The process, of course, is putting the humans behind the lever and getting the appropriate combination of human skills, processes, and technologies in order to actually leverage that thing in order to do that. And this is eliminated by rot. As we do increase the elimination of rot, we now have the opportunity to increase the leverage that we have in our data because it costs less. Again, 80% of corporate data falls into this category of rot. Well, that's going to make the hardware vendors of the world kind of upset, because we're telling we don't need it. But what we're really saying is not that we don't need your hardware, but we want to put your hardware to higher and better use instead of storing data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial, because that's really not value added for anybody on. And of course, the bigger the organization, the greater the leveraging potential exists. So treating data as an asset simultaneously lowers IT costs and improves IT worker knowledge productivity. Not just the IT workers, but also our other knowledge workers that we have. We did a project recently with a chemical manufacturing company, and they had a room full of 100 chemical PhDs in chemistry, a lot of money, and these guys are writing SQL. And we were able to measurably improve the productivity of that team by adding some good data management discipline to this, which is, again, having the right level people doing the right kind of work. We can get data management done a lot cheaper than having a PhD teach a PhD how to write SQL statements. In addition to that, CIOs must understand architecture. And I love this particular diagram because one of the things people look at with this diagram is they say, oh my goodness, that's a sucky architecture. And it turns out it's actually not. For example, if you had a choice between that architecture and this one, I would hope that you could see that you could build another layer on top of this particular building. It might not be easy, but it's certainly doable, and that's where you bring in architecting and engineering skills. But it would be an absolute silly waste of anybody's money to put anything more into this building until we've repaired the foundation of this obviously earthquake-damaged building and then build on top of this. But I can't tell you how many times I've gone into companies where their data foundation looks like this and they're wanting a data warehouse on top of it. So understanding this architectural component is absolutely fundamental and crucial in order to get this. In addition, you must also understand engineering concepts. And Shannon and I were joking with this about just before, because I took this picture when we had our conference in San Diego, gosh, I think it was 2009. I may not be right about that one. But I snapped this photograph, and I asked people from an engineering perspective, what is it? Well, first of all, it's taller than I am, and I'm 5'8.5". So it's a big machine. It has a clutch. A clutch? Why would you need a clutch? Well, the question is, it was built in the 1940s, and it still is in regular use today. So what is it? Well, it's the pancake mixer on the Carrier Midway that is anchored in San Diego Harbor as a floating living museum. Now, you say, okay, cute, it's a big mixer, right? Well, let's look at this. If I just went to Amazon and bought a bunch of those mixers and started making pancakes for 2,000 sailors, how long would those mixers last? And the answer is, of course, not very long, because their duty cycle is much shorter. It's designed for home use, which means you might make pancakes once a week. This thing makes breakfast for thousands of soldiers every day, and it has since the early 1940s. It's a brilliant piece of engineering. It's a wonderful machine, and it, again, illustrates these concepts that we're talking about of architecture and leverage. These are just some of the things that CIOs must have, but unfortunately, most CIOs don't. Most CIOs are not the ultimate authority on organizational information assets, which means when somebody's asking them to make a decision about it, they are not knowledgeable of the subject material and therefore unqualified to make a decision. But the rest of the board, the rest of the C-levels around, turn to that individual for their knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we have a dichotomy here, a very, very big problem. Most CIOs are unable to devote the required time and attention to managing these organizational assets. If you're lucky, you get 5% of their time, and that is clearly not enough, as I've showed you by the performance statistics that we've collected over the years. They are not possessed of the requisite expertise to do this. They've never had a course in how to be a data manager. And as a chief information officer, one would hope that would fall somewhere under their duties, but as I said, it's not working out that way, so hence we have the chief data officer pieces coming in play. But there aren't many places that teach you how to be a chief data officer either, are there? Finally, they're not situated to achieve success because they have a technology development perspective. And I'll get into that in the next section of the piece. But I want to say one more thing about this slide, and that is that some of these ideas, by no means all of them, are encapsulated in a really wonderful book that I came across recently by Martha Heller called the CIO Paradox. And it talks about several of the other types of contradictions that our CIOs do. And if you think about it, it's pretty straightforward. What is the focus of the Chief Information Officer? Finance. What is the focus of the Chief Medical Officer? Medical decisions. What is the chief focus of the Chief Risk Officer? Again, risk pieces. What is the chief focus of the CIOs? Well, it's everything from the email system went down to the backup and recovery didn't work to the I've got a brand new business initiative that I want you to design systems for. Do this. Again, there's simply no way. They are not set up to succeed in this area, and it's foolish for us to expect them to be. So, next final point on this as we round up towards the top of the hour here is, what is the relationship between data and IT? And I hope you find this interesting as well. This was an insight that occurred to several of us with the help of some adult beverages, and that's all I'll say about it. But let's talk about systems development activities. Most of you are familiar with the SDLC, the Systems Development Life Cycle. And if we look at the Systems Development Life Cycle, the focus is on creating things. We're taking something, we're taking a situation where nothing exists and making something out of it by creating some new organizational capabilities. The whole SDLC is the process of creating something, with one exception, and that exception being the brand new organization that has no data. Your data already exists. And because your data already exists, we're not going to create it. Although it seems well enough to go in and create a new database, which is what we've been teaching people in college and universities, but your data itself does exist. So the data is a different process. We simply want to move our data from its current state to its future state, whatever version of that future state is that we need to have. And that is an evolutionary process, which is very different from a create process. Two fundamentally different things we have now. We're trying to do data with our create process. And is it any wonder that it doesn't work? Not in my mind, it isn't. Let me dive into a little bit more in-depth example here. And you see some flashing in the upper left-hand corner of your screens there and a very, very light shade of gray triangle. I'm going to call that your information architecture. Because the first time that you do this, it's going to be vague, not well-defined, kind of hazy, but you're trying it. Now, it turns out that the data evolution process is external to and must precede the systems development activities. If your information architecture does not exist, your system development lifecycle activities will be focused on trying to create things that you already have in your organization. So let's take the first example of a systems development lifecycle effort. And in the requirement stage of that systems development lifecycle effort, you might ask some questions of the information architecture. Give me all of the metadata. Tell me all of the data-related assets that we have that pertain to customer. Now, we'll forget about it. Another session, I warned you all several times previously, do not ever let anybody label anything as naively simple as the customer, because that will cause absolute confusion in the later runs. But let's just for the moment run with that example. So we ask for it, and we get back some stuff, some results. Maybe it's a definition. Maybe we've reverse engineered an existing system to see how, for example, SAP handles this or something. When you have finished doing the requirements design and implementation in that systems development initiative, you add that system to your information, you add that metadata to your information architecture, which then extends your information architecture further than it was. The second time that you do this, you ask more concrete questions because you're now more familiar with the type of information that is stored and managed in your information architecture. That then gives you better results because your information architecture is more complete, more robust, and you put better still system metadata back into it and still further extend the systems development lifecycle effort. The third time that you go to do this, you get really good requests. They have high expectations. They get results back that are of tangible value. And again, we still extend the scope and depth and utility of our information architecture. Over time, the number of these requests increases, the utility of the results increases, and the amount of metadata contributed by these new systems development activities increases as well. So again, where I started out on this slide, the information development, the data development pieces are separate from and must precede any systems development activities. If they do not, your efforts will succeed as well as everybody else's efforts, and we'll go back to my quote about the definition of insanity. So, the last section of this is going to talk about where the Chief Data Officer should report. And one of the things we feel strongly about is that IT does not feel the true impact of poor data management decisions. Instead, the business feels those. So why not have that individual report to the part that is impacted by that? 2, IT does not know the organizational business rules that govern the data and its use. They're called business rules because they're somewhere over on the other side. They're not in IT. If we put the Chief Data Officer over on the business side, they no longer become business rules, they become rules. And more importantly, they don't need to be translated anymore. Number 3, IT does not own or control access to the subject matters that we need, the SMEs, the subject matter experts, that we need to implement the business-driven data-centric development practices. Now, what that means is that when we're trying to get somebody on a project who can tell us a little bit about what's going on and translate these business rules, if you will, if we're still in that sort of old mindset, and we go to people who say, hey, we'd like your best people to be with us on this project. If the business doesn't feel that this is a high priority project, they are not going to send you their best people. In fact, they will probably send you the lowest performing people in the organization. Or even if you do get the best people, you're not going to have them forever. So it's very difficult to gain access to the subject matter expertise that you're trying to do if you're coming at it from an IT perspective. Only the business can competently assign the value of data in its various uses. IT can guess, but the business actually has to live with the results. Reporting to IT has been expected because people think of data and they think it's IT. More importantly, IT does have a probably better set of methods. Most people call them methodologies. I don't like that word much at all, but methods that they have. So IT tends to own the methods, so people tend to think they should do it that way. And let's not forget as well, what CIOs do, whether they're called CIOs or CTOs, they're slammed. They've got tons of things that are going on. Take some arguments on the other side of it as well. It's an appropriate division of labor. If you think about it, requirement specification is all about defining what. Design activities, however, are focused on how. So the what being done on the business side and the how being done on the IT side is an absolutely appropriate division of labor that goes in there. In addition, we can also make a case for reducing these requirements translations, because if we're working with them on the business side, the business will maintain them. And one of the things we have the Chief Data Officer doing is, in fact, maintaining some of these rules and regulations that we put in place, maintaining the business knowledge, if you will. It encourages the business to learn IT-driven methods. That's not a bad thing. And it encourages the business people to learn about architect and engineering component reuse in order to do this. So our plan here for the top data job is that we expect it to report in at the same level of other important assets in the organization. In this chart for this example, I'm simply saying that there's a top information technology job, a top operations job, a top finance job, and a top marketing job, and a top data job. So this is where the CDO would report. Notice also I'm putting in place that they are the lead of the data governance organization, and that there's clearly a cooperative role that has to occur between the top information technology job and the top data governance job. They're going to be working joined at the hip, if you will. Now again, much work to justify the function, but very little talent out there in order to do this, which gets us to our third and final polling question here. Do you think the CDO or the top data job should report to IT or the business side of the organization? We've got four choices for you. A, it should report to the CIO. B, it should report to the business. C, they should report to the CIO and the business. Or D, the CDO should report somewhere else. Again, we're interested in your opinion on this. Give you a minute to tell us what you think.
All right, it looks like we have some answers here. Looks like for A, 4% of you think that the CDO should report to the CIO. 27% of you think the CDO should report to the business. And 36% of you think the CDO should report to, and I can't see because it's
probably both, right?
on your screen.
Sorry about that.
You jumping ahead there?
I did. I'm sorry. I wanted to get back to this one slide here that we did, which is to say that right now most of these functions aren't occurring in organizations. So we're going to take your input in there and put in, oh good, somebody actually suggested another category in there. We can incorporate that in the survey there. Thanks, Kathleen. Anyway, overall here, these functions are not being done in most organizations, and consequently it's very difficult to figure out what's actually going on. So we're just about at the top of the hour here. Again, let me mention that I'm taking what I consider to be, and a lot of people consider to be, a somewhat extreme position in the sense that data has been neglected over the years. And the analogy here is pretty straightforward. Around the turn of the century, we had a lot of organizations that had a chief electrification officer. But as soon as they figured out how to use electricity, that title went away. So there are very few of them around, although they're still being used in some developing countries that are out there. So I think we really need to have this chief data officer focusing on data on this. And here's my case in a nutshell. Yes, Your Honor, this is my case. To sum up as for the jury, First of all, data cannot be considered a project. So managing it as a project is a terrible idea. Data persists, it has no beginning or ending, hence putting it out of the project management class of things to do all the way around. It must be managed outside of the SDLC. The SDLC is a create process and data is an evolving function. I want to make sure that happens. I contend it should report to the business. If it reports to IT, then we have a CIO that we're asking to manage half their stuff on as a project and half their stuff not as a project. We're asking CIOs to do a lot as it is, but I don't want to break their heads, and I think that's what that would do. And finally, the top data job must be full-time. It must be a dedicated individual. And I wish I had better guidance for people, but at the moment we're saying put somebody to work on it for a year full-time, and at the end of the year that individual will have an idea of the size and shape of the organizational data challenge. They won't have solved your data problems, but now they're better prepared to solve it. And that's what we want to try to do, is to take it that direction. So as Megan and Shannon said up front, we're going to carry this context of the discussion into next week, where we're going to talk about this. So same time on Tuesday next week, and this is going to be a much more interactive section. We've actually got 6 particular topics we're going to discuss as we go through, and then I'm going to turn it over, because we're at the top of the hour, back to Megan, and we'll take some questions and look forward to your discussion. So thank you, everybody, and let's see what we got in the way of discussion. Have I really angered anybody?
All right, thanks, Peter. Now it's time for our Q&A, time for you all to ask your questions, so just click on the Q&A chat feature. You should be able to submit your questions through that chat window, or the Q&A window. We'll give everyone a few seconds to get their questions in. Let's see here.
It's interesting, Megan. One of the first questions that I get asked on this is, aren't people going to get confused between a chief information officer and a chief data officer? And I think the answer to that is yes, which is one of the reasons I'm really taking this sort of extreme position. Truth be told, most CIOs are really chief technology officers. And if they would acknowledge that fact, and I've had several conversations with CIOs over the last 2 years as I was putting this material together, where they say, yeah, you're right, we're not really doing much with data and I don't know much about it, so I'm very happy to get it off of my plate and give it to somebody else. But it does mean somebody else has to have it. One of my favorite things to do in this area is to talk about various labels. And one of the things I urge people as we're doing data quality seminars is to make a little sign for themselves and put it on their desk or their cube and say, I'm responsible for all the data quality in this entire organization. Because eventually somebody's going to walk by your desk and say, Megan, who told you you could be in charge? And Megan, your answer is, I really don't want to do this. Here, you have the sign and go give it to somebody else. Because once you make it into a sign, that's symbolic of the fact that somebody's got to pay attention to it. And right now we're getting, unfortunately, buried because everybody thinks everybody else is taking care of it. So that's my sort of 2 cents on the CDO versus the CIO question.
All right, see, that was very insightful. Let's see here. The first question we have is, can you talk about the relationship between the CDO and the enterprise architecture competency? How heavily should the CDO be involved in EA?
A great question. So let me jump back a couple slides and just put this one up. So in Peter's world, and sometimes Peter's world comes true and sometimes it doesn't, just like all of our things, but the data governance organization actually has the enterprise architects reporting into it there. They do not report into the CIO. The work that they do is evolutionary in nature. It's opposed to creationist in nature. And so the enterprise architects should be reporting into that data governance organization. I'll go a step further than that too and say that the language that the data governance organization must speak is metadata. Because if they're not grounding what they do in metadata speak, it's very hard for them to come up with any tangible outputs. And I've seen an awful lot of data governance programs that have started up over the past couple of years and have produced wonderful policies and procedures, but they don't know what to do next. And so, again, our language, our work products, the things that we do are all architecture and engineering related, and the enterprise architects in general should be reporting into that data governance organization. But again, I'm interested in your thoughts too.
All right, great. The next question is, if this is a new role, how are companies addressing this need right now?
That's an interesting one, and that's one of the reasons we're doing the survey. So again, I'll urge you to take our survey that's on this. Again, Megan, I forgot, where does that survey thing on here? You can tell me which link it is to get us to that. But what we're seeing is that right now about 80% of the chief data officers are in fact reporting up to CIOs. And we just think this is compounding the problem. CIOs work on technology projects. Data is not a project. So trying to have somebody who is not doing project work in an environment that is driven by projects, it's a fundamental incompatibility. And I see that being very, very problematic. Again, one of the things we'll do next week is we'll pull out some of these survey results that you get so we can tease apart these things and see what's really happening down at the nuts and bolts level on these things. But and also another statistic that we've been getting too is that about 80% of the CDO positions were created in the last 12 months. So it's clearly reached fad status. People are, wow, yeah, I need a CDO. Okay, well, questions, what are you going to do with them, where are they going to report, and what knowledge, skills, and abilities do you want them to have? Because as far as I know, there's no CDO training schools out there, although there's lots that are claiming to be, but that's a different issue.
Okay, and actually Shannon will be sending out the link to the survey and the follow-up email, so keep an eye out on your inbox for that.
Yeah, please do give us results on that, because we're very interested in what's happening out there in the real world. This is one of the ways we find out. We talk to people, but we also get statistical information.
Okay, and on to the next question. I am a data architect. Would you recommend I focus my continued studies more on business strategy and other aspects of the business side?
I think if you're an architect of any type in an organization and you feel weak in enterprise strategy, that it would be definitely a good conversation to have. By the way, I'll recommend a terrific book in that area. Most people have been going back to Michael Porter's work, which is the sort of fundamental piece in strategy, but there's actually a much better book on Michael Porter that was written by his editor, and I don't mean to take anything away from Michael Porter, but his editor kind of looked, this is the editor at the Harvard Business Review, right, took a look at his writings over time and said, you know, a lot of people still aren't getting what Michael Porter is saying, so she distilled it down into a very nice book called Understanding Porter. And it's a terrific read, and it really gives you everything you need to know about strategy. So the short answer to the question from the enterprise data architect is yes, absolutely. If your architectural strategy isn't focused on the organizational strategy, one might ask the question, what is the purpose that you're doing? So we could go into a couple of other components here, which is that strategy has two different dimensions. One of the dimensions is a effectiveness and efficiency ploy, which is something that Walmart and other companies have exploited to a tremendous advantage, everyday low cost kind of things, or an innovation ploy. And the two are not incompatible, but you can't do both at the same time. And it's probably better to get good at saving and being efficient about it before you move on to the higher and self-actualization uses that we have there. So I probably overshared with you on that, but short answer is yes, I would be definitely reading some things about business strategy, and that book on Understanding Michael Porter is a great place to start.
All right, great. The next question is, I advocate a strong CDO relationship to IT. If CDO reports to the business, what are your thoughts of promoting a core data-centric team tightly linking the business with IT?
Thank you for reminding me. I didn't actually put that linkage up there. Yes, absolutely. So if we have the top data job being a business-led function, again, the CDO reporting to the business, then the conversation between the data governance organization and the top information technology job, again, our CTO, if you will, becomes a conversation about the top data job saying, we have these types of assets, they have these characteristics. Again, I'll align it to a building block, a concrete block that we use to build buildings with. We know that these concrete building blocks have some properties. Some of the properties are that they do really well for buildings that are 5 stories and under. But if you're trying to build a steel frame building with concrete blocks, it's probably not going to work out so well. So they are the concentrating on the what piece. the information technology people then go in and say, okay, that's an MDM solution, or that is a big data play that you need to make there. And they talk about the how of the implementation. And that is a very different process from describing the what. So the what's closer to the business, and consequently it's more likely to be aligned with the business needs and to be an ongoing subject of conversation about this. And then the top IT job on the other side talks about how to take those what's and put them into a form where it's useful for the organization. I tried to answer your question. If I didn't get that right, please write back in and make me clarify that, but I think that's the question you were asking.
Okay, and the next question is, if your company has several businesses, does each business have its own CDO, or do you put the CDO and IT to cover all of them?
Great question, and I can't answer that for your organization. But the real question is, and you can do this mathematically, if you look at a subject area model for your data, and find out there's more data in common across those business lines than is disparate, right, then I would suggest that that would be a central managed function. Whereas if you have three separate businesses and one does catering, and one does costume manufacturing, and a third one does long-distance telephone service, right? Those are going to be three disparate businesses, and each one of those should have their own piece at the top. Again, I'm taking an extreme example. You're the person that is more expert at that and can come up with the analysis to show people. And here it's pretty straightforward to do. Let's just take a list of all the data that we have, the major subject areas that we have in the data, and put them in a matrix and show which businesses use which piece. And that matrix, I'm convinced, will give you a good deal of insight into answering that question specifically for your organization. Great question.
All right. The next question is, how does the chief data officer role align with the chief analytics officer? Are these two separate roles, and can organizations have both of these roles?
Good. Okay. So we're seeing a lot of this now, where organizations are now, in fact, trying to put in place these roles that talk about exploiting data. And generally we're very happy to have these things that occur. What we do see, however, though, is that most organizations that have these chief analytics officers are organizations that do not have a chief data officer. So what you're doing then is you're taking really smart people who want to do this, and you're asking them to work in this green triangle area without the benefit of any of that blue triangle support. In addition to that, most organizations from their chief analytics officers tend to focus in on the tool, whatever standard analytics package, whether they're cubing the stuff or whether they're doing ClickView or some other things. Again, many, many different analytics tools. SAS, for example, SAS, not SaaS, types of things. They tend to become aligned with the tools and techniques and practices having to do with the advanced pieces of this. And you can do it. Most organizations, the vast majority of them, have in fact succeeded in building the green part of that pyramid without paying proper attention to the blue part, the support functions that we're talking about. However, what they produce takes longer, costs more, and delivers less than if they had done it properly. So before an organization puts in place a chief analytics officer, I want them to put in place a chief data officer. They will find it's a much more effective business value-driven proposition.
All right, great. The next question is, if metadata is so important, why don't you see adoption of metadata repositories anymore?
Actually, you do. What we really have a problem with is sustainment of metadata repositories. My colleague Dave Eddy did a study that he presented at MIT last year where he showed the half-life of these things was about 5 years. We've been in a lot of organizations where they bought a metadata repository and it's sitting there on the shelf not doing much of anything. So it is critical that people understand the value of this. And you have to go to management and say, you don't do this because you're supposed to do this. You do this because it lowers your cost of goods sold, improves your top line, increases your sales, decreases your customer dissatisfaction. They have to be couched in business reasons. And the repository vendors are getting this. And when you talk to people like ASG and CA and other people who are in this space, they are now starting to speak to you about the business value that comes out of these technologies. I think as organizations figure out the value, you'll see these things start to improve, and also the vendors are making them easier to use, which means you don't have to invest quite so much in the technology to get there. It's still an important investment, but it's nowhere near what it used to be in terms of the technological footprint and the overhead required to serve these. But again, very insightful, the use of these tools, case tools, metadata repositories, and all this, of course, is not increasing. It's not decreasing, but it's about level. But of course, the use of spreadsheets is increasing at an astronomical rate. Good for Microsoft on that one, right? Good question.
All right, next one is, if you see the CDO as a temporary position, then it has an end date, so how is it not a project?
Excellent. Okay, so I'm, again, taking the position that organizations need a chief data officer. And the reason they need it is because they haven't been doing these things. Now, in terms of a project, the project that you've just described there might be, let's get a handle on what we really know about our data. Let's understand our data, let's chop it up, let's decide, let's get rid of the 80% of it that falls into the rot category. And if you get that done, you might find out that the data volume is small enough that you can parse it up into the various business units and do something along those lines. That would be very, very helpful. But it is a good point. I don't really think that in today's economy, with everything that's coming down the road and the literally billions of devices that are now capable of producing data and shoving it around, that we're not going to need a chief data officer. But I do want to put it out there as a possibility so that management doesn't think we're just adding another C layer of bureaucracy to everything that goes on. We clearly are not doing that. We very much want to have somebody in charge of the data and working on it, and if data is important to what you're doing as a business, I doubt anybody's going to say that your HR officer is no longer needed as well, but it's a fair point. So in that sense, I think you could say that the project would be getting a handle on your data and deciding you didn't need a chief data officer. So that project would have an end. I'm not sure how many organizations will fall into that category. Good question, though.
Okay, the next question is, how best is the CDO job business case presented in terms of positive economic impact?
How best? Is that what you said, Megan?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things I urge groups to do is to find out what is the language that they're speaking in the corporate offices. We've gone into a number of organizations where we'll actually walk in and say, we think your strategy is X, Y, and Z. And they'll look at us with these deer in the headlights looking at, where did you get that strategy? And the answer is, we read your 10K. Right? Your filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission tell you an awful lot about how your business is being run and what are the goals and aspirations of the business. So when we look at this and say, how are things pulled together, we really, really do need to focus in on what are the basics of the data management practices. Again, our strategy is pretty straightforward: crawl, walk, and then run. Don't try to take somebody who's just mastered crawling and ask them to do a marathon. Megan, you've run some marathons, haven't you?
Oh, that's Eileen.
I thought you'd run some with her, though. I know Eileen runs. She's terrific on that.
I don't like to run.
Not even when people are chasing. Okay, we won't do that. Anyway, hopefully that gets at it. Did I hit the rest of that question right?
It looks like it. Let's see if they come back with any other questions on that.
Okay.
So let's see here. The next question is, what is a good East Coast event for people that are interested in a top data job? Oh,
wow.
So what? Yeah.
That sounds like a loaded question there. And it just happens to be a Chief Data Officer Symposium that Rich Wang is running up at MIT in July. Megan, are those dates available to you where you are?
I can tell you that it will be July. Let me see here. No, MIT. So it'll be July 16th to the
July 16th. So that would be a great East Coast event for you to try and get an invite to. If you have trouble getting a hold of that, you should be able to Google CDO and MIT, and it should come up for you. But if you have trouble with that, get in touch with us. We'll certainly put you in touch with the people who are organizing that.
Great. The next question is, what are some mentoring opportunities for the CDO role?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I think there's two types of mentoring activities. I mentioned before that I'm speaking broadly and that I'm accusing 90% of the CIOs who are out there of not having been trained correctly. They don't know what they don't know, and consequently, with it being an unknown unknown, they're not really at fault. Nobody's, blaming them for this, but they just don't know about these architecture and engineering components that we've talked about in the last hour here. That said, I think that the remaining 10%, and when I was reviewing the book, I had a reviewer in particular who gave me a very nice review, but he said, I just don't believe that most CIOs know as little about data management as you're accusing them here. And again, I'm not trying to accuse anybody of not knowing something, but when you look at numbers like the one I'm showing here on the screen, those are atrociously low performing numbers. And if most C-levels, when they see this going on in their organization, they realize that not having documented data management processes ensures that this will be a craft. So the first mentoring opportunity is for some of those CIOs who really get this stuff to go in and mentor other CIOs. I think there's a terrific opportunity there because they know what happened. Or, I'm sorry, I said mentoring other CIOs, mentoring the CDOs. I really can mentor CIOs as well. But anyway, there's that 10% of the group that do have the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities that are in there to do this. And I think that's a great way to do it. I think another way to do it, too, and this is, I'm sure, one of the critiques that's going to come out of the book when it comes out, because the only purpose of the book is to hopefully give you guys past this argument of do you need somebody in charge of data on this. Beyond, a lot of people who read the book, though, so far are saying, well, what's the next path? Well, it's organization dependent. It really is. You can't tell me that, Corporation X is going to have the same type of duties as for Chief Data Officer as Corporation Y, unless they happen to be in exactly the same space doing exactly the same kinds of things. And as you know, that there are some competitors out there, but they're more the exception than the reality. One of the things we'll be presenting at the upcoming Enterprise Data World is actually a size and shape of this market space. So a good colleague, friend of mine, Robert Lutton, put together some really interesting numbers that we'll be presenting there as well, just about how big the market is. And it turns out it's a pretty good-sized market, not only domestically U.S., but worldwide. So again, hope that answered that question.
Okay. The next question is, one of the key gaps I see is not the role definition so much as the absence of a true cooperative link between architecture, design, and implementation.
Agree, and a very good observation in there. If you can imagine trying with this type of structure here, I'll go back to my top data job reporting structure, and having somebody who's trying to pull into play here and say data as an asset needs to be architected in order to be useful for our organizational strategy. And then having that be somebody else say, well, when is that going to be done? Again, that's sort of the typical project management question that comes up. And the answer is never. You should always be evaluating your assets for their strengths and weaknesses so that you can make sure that you're continually improving the quality of those assets and their ability to contribute into organizational success. So if we're trying to have the enterprise architects work underneath the CIO, which is 100% project mentality, there's simply no way that can work, and it hasn't worked to date. And if you found it to work in your organizations, I'd love to do it because I'd love to find some success stories. But with well over 500 data points in here, we find very few that even approach that particular process. So again, they've got to be pulled out. They've got to be put in a place where they can be successful. And when they can become successful, they can demonstrate that business value. And that will actually help the CIOs as well, or the CTOs as we'd prefer to call them, now start to implement things because the business requirements will be better than they would if they were just all done in that one fashion that's sort of a traditional approach. Again, a little bit of a jumbled answer there, but I think I've tried to get at it. If not, please write us back and we'll try to clarify.
All right, the And the next question is, if the requisite experience is rare and demand outstrips supply, how should organizations fill the CDO position? Is it possible to take an incomplete skill set and learn on the job?
Yes, there's been, and this will be an interesting point when Micheline and I get into this next week, but we've always had a saying in IT that it's easier to teach business people IT than it is to teach IT to, it's easier to teach IT to business people than it is to teach business to IT people. The way we've socialized IT people for years and years and years, they are really aligned with their profession. A DBA is going to be aligned to their Oracle solution or DB2 solution. A network person is going to be a Cisco person, right? A software person is going to be a Java developer. These are the alliances. This is the language they speak. This is the stuff that they know and love. They're passionate about this. But the business people don't have that. And the data people, luckily, are not aligned to any specific technology unless they happen to get overly enamored with their case tool or their repository, and that's really pretty rare. So we've had actually discussions going on about whether the IT still exists, and there's a great article that just came out the other day. Again, I think it was Wall Street Journal, part of that big data stuff on the front page on Monday of this week, that talked about this in a little bit more detail. And they were taking an even more extreme position than I were. They're saying that IT's been an absolute failure in terms of its support for business processes. I don't know that I would go that far and make that statement, but if you're trying to get people to look at your articles and blogs, it doesn't hurt to be really extreme. Again, I hope I answered that right.
Okay, and the next question is, where within the 5 organizations do you place data modeling?
When you say the 5 organizations, the ones on the screen here, so modeling is an architecture discipline, and that would be in part of the data governance organization. The data governance organization controls the architects who are the modelers. Now, once we hand that off to the physical modelers, and actually I do have a slide that addresses that. This is not part of your presentation. Give me a quick second here and I'll pull up something. I know we're almost at the time, but I think I can find this pretty quickly. It is, there we go. That's not it. What I did is I took the DIMBOK that people are perhaps familiar with that I showed. There it is. At the beginning, the wheel. And I looked at those functions and we're trying to figure out which way these functions would go. So let's see. Here we go. And I'm suggesting this, so I'm absolutely not saying this will work. But here's the DIMBOK wheel, and what I've outlined in red there as data development and database operations management, we'll call it physical modeling. Okay, the actual build is an IT function, but the definition of it, the logical components of it, are things that should be up there shared with the business in there. So the 2 green areas that I've shown, metadata management and data security management, are shared with the business, and every one of those other functions on that wheel, in my mind, goes to the business. And boy, is that going to raise some hackle somewhere. But I think, again, as a business-driven organization with looking to achieve business value, this is where we're going to get the best value if we do something along these lines. So again, I'll try to remember to include that in the slides that go out, so you guys can take a look at that as well. And again, give us your feedback. I'm not going to tell you I've got all the answers here.
All right, and it looks like we're about to run out of time. So if any questions we didn't get to yours during the session, we will have those answered and sent out through the follow-up materials that will be emailed in the next 2 business days. And thank you everyone for participating in today's event. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be Unlock Business Value Through Data Governance. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks everyone and have a great day.
And again, next week we'll be on for the rest of this discussion. Look forward to everybody joining into that discussion as well. Thanks.
Agreed. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Megan. Another fantastic webinar, and thanks everyone for attending and all the fantastic questions. There's a ton of questions coming in today. That's great. And I will, as Megan mentioned, I'll send out the follow-up email and include the link to the survey as well, so everyone can have access to the survey. So, hope everyone has a great day, and thanks so much for attending.